In 2011, we were working on the new exhibition for the 40th anniversary of the Royal Oak. And at this time, we asked a photographer to come to take some images that we thought that would be nice to illustrate this exhibition. And this guy, Dan Holsworth, came with images that were completely different from what we are in our minds. I mean, for us, the Vallée des Joues, it was the nice lake, the blue sky, and the mountain, and things like that. And it came back with those images of rocks, of clouds, of mist. And we say, but how comes this is not our valley? And then we realize, yes, it is. So how comes that people decided to settle in such a place in the first place, in such a place at the beginning? And that was actually the beginning of a kind of soul-searching process where we rediscover things that somehow we knew but at a non-conscious level that then help us to get a better understanding of the purpose of the brand. And what we rediscovered was that the first people who decided to settle in the Vallée des Joues were people that were very independent-minded. They were people who wanted to be able to live without being under the rule of the King of France or the Duke of Savoy or the Emperor of Germany. So they decided that it was better for them to live in a difficult region where nobody will bother about them than to have an easier life, but under the rule of someone else. And that's why they decided to move to the Vallée des Joues. But the problem that they faced was that in the Vallée des Joues, there were nearly no resources. You cannot grow anything in the Vallée des Joues. The only thing that you have, it's a lot of rocks, dark forests, and a lot of snow. But what happened is that among those rusts, some were a little bit special. They had a tiny quantity of rust. So using the wood from the forest to feed their furnace, they've been able to extract this rust and transform it into iron. And as the quantities were limited and the process complicated, they had to specialize into making small objects with a high added value. And that's why that they started to make watch mechanism. They started to develop extremely complex mechanism. They took their inspiration from the star. For instance, they tried to replicate the movement of the star and of the moon in the sky on the Earth around the sun, and it became something like a perpetual calendar, like what you have here. A perpetual calendar actually is a micro representation of the movements of our planet around the sun and of the moon around it. So it was something that was extremely complicated to do. But they had those long nights to think about that, and all this time to transform it into watches. The other thing that is very important is that as they had all this time, they were also trying to make sure that every component would be as perfect as possible, as beautiful as possible. And that's something that is still very present today in our company. Our watchmakers are extremely proud to make sure that every component, even if it's not visible, is as perfect as possible. The company was founded in 1875 by my great-grandfather and his partner. But for them, it was not the beginning. Both of them were from watchmaking families. The great-grandfather of my great-grandfather was already a watchmaker, and we have a watch that he made, we think in 1760 or something like that. So the reason why they decided to work together was to increase the chances of this tradition to continue. Because what happened at the end of the 18th century was the arrival of 19th century was the arrival of the mass production of watches. The Americans were making watches by millions, and that's something that was also starting to happen in Europe and in Switzerland. So for them, that was not what they wanted to do. They wanted to continue to make complicated mechanisms that were made by human beings and not by machines. So that's why they said, okay, if we work together, if we start a new company with our allied forces, we will enhance the chances that this tradition will continue. So for us, that is something that is very important, because we know that the company does not belong to us, that it belongs to the people that are working in this company, that it belongs to their families, that it belongs to the Vallée de Joux, and that what we have to do is our best. So when the time will come, we will be able to pass it to the next generation. That's why we are trying to think in terms of, we don't think in terms of quarterly reports, we try to think in terms of generation. When I have a decision to take, I try to think at the same time of what my grandfather would have decided 50 years ago, and of what my grandchildren in 50 years will think about the decision that I'm about to take. So it was not an easy decision to take, because before I never really considered joining the family company. It was something that my grandfather was involved into, and but that's all. And I think what helped me at the time to take the decision is the memories of what I saw when I was a kid. So I was never, how could I say, educated with the idea of being directly involved, but I had those memories and this wow souvenir, and how could I say, I remember the people, the watchmakers. So for me, I thought that it was worth it. And something else that was also important, that my grandfather told us when we were kids, that one way, if one day we had to be involved somehow, we will have to remember that the company would not belong to us, that it was something that we may have to do our best to maintain in the Vallée de Joux. So that's how I eventually became involved into Audemars Piguet, where I spent about 8 or 9 years at different operational positions, and then I left when I joined the board. And today I'm the vice chairman of the board, but I'm also chairing what we call the strategic committee, which is the entity that is in charge of thinking on the long-term future of the company. At the beginning, for a long time, watches were mostly an instrument to tell the time. And the accuracy was extremely important. You know that it was developed, one of the reasons of the development of precise watches, why the development of the sailing ships that had to go into the open sea and to be able to locate the position extremely precisely. And then there were smaller versions that were put at the wrist. But during this time, there was in parallel a few brands that produce additional and not really necessary additional mechanism. Because, I mean, fundamentally, you don't need to have a watch with a mechanism that will tell you, that will take into account every 4 years that there is a 29th of February. You don't necessarily need to have a minute repeater or a chiming mechanism to know if you wake up at 3 o'clock during the night, if it's quarter past 3, or if it's 20. So basically, those mechanisms were not really necessary, but they represented an extreme in terms of mastery because they were so complicated. And people buy those watches not only to tell the time, to know the time, but also because they wanted to have on their wrist something that was made by extremely skilled people. We need to have something where we have this notion of something that is grounded into a reality, something that has a specificity, maybe sometimes some small imperfection because it's made by human being, something that has a lasting value. And when we bring those people to the Vallée de Joux, young people as well as older people, and when they have this experience of being there, when they see the watchmakers, most of them, they understand. They have this emotional experience that is extremely important. And it's something that is also very important for us, because what we want is to organize this encounter between the customer and the watchmaker around the watch. The watchmaker, our watchmaker, they need to meet the people that are going to buy the watches, because it gives them energy to see someone that is very excited about wearing one of their watches or waiting for a watch. It gives them a lot of energy. And it's true also on the other way around. When the customer, the young guy, will meet the watchmaker, an old watchmaker or a young watchmaker, and they will discuss, and the watchmaker will explain how it's doing things, and you will see how the guy works. The young guy will understand that, I know if it's an extremely complicated watch, it could take 6 to 8 months to produce one, then it will touch him. And I think that's the only way to do it. What is very important is that you have to be true. You have to make sure that what you say is what you do. If at one point you build a kind of marketing talk which does not rely to what you are really, it may be okay for a certain period of time, but then it won't work. And I think that young people can understand that.